Save the Semantics, episode 281. It is November 19th, 2024. My name is Myro. This is the podcast where I ramble on for a bit about some shit. Recording this on a Tuesday evening / late afternoon. It has gotten cold, as I mentioned last time. Unfortunately, to the point, cold and dark. And usually what I like to do is I like to record out in nature, and just to get in touch with, the earth and all that stuff. But I just, it's cold, and the last time I did that, my hands started to get cold, and that's my fault for not wearing gloves or anything like that. But still, I should have been more prepared, but also I'm aware that it might not be the best thing to do at the time. So I think I'm just gonna record indoors from now on, instead of doing it outside, which is my way, my go-to, but it is what it is. Anyways, we are already it's I pay less and less attention to the days, the specific days and weeks of a month or a year. But before you know it, we're already midway through November, which is kind of crazy. Starting to see a lot of Christmas decorations and stuff, I think, which makes a little bit more sense than it did 3 weeks ago. Even during kind of Halloween period, we started to see Christmas decorations. It's all right, we're kind of jumping the gun a bit. You got 2 months. Just chill out a bit. But I think it lines up a little bit more now more so than it did maybe a few weeks back. But whatever. It's you can kind of get a sense of it a little bit. You know what I mean? Definitely the chill in the air. Next week it's gonna rain a lot, which I hate. Not a fan of that, obviously. I hate the rain. I've exclaimed this many times before, but I dislike the rain. I understand that you need the rain for just water, just having a sufficient amount of water and all that stuff, and part of helping maintain an ecosystem and the plants and the life and all that stuff. I understand the benefits of having water. However, I hate being in the rain. I hate the fact I feel like I can't, enjoy being out and about, getting wet. I just can't handle that. I've never been a fan of that. So I don't know, maybe I'll adapt. Maybe I'll just carry around an umbrella all the time. Maybe if I want to do my walks, I'll just walk around with an umbrella and boots and all that shit. I don't know. We'll see. But I just not a fan. It's annoying. The roads get slippery. People can't drive for shit in the rain. It's just not a good combination. Period. So I don't know. Not looking forward to that, but I'm just gonna try to make the most out of it. When it does come around. I have been continuing to play through Dragon Quest 3. It's a really just comfortable game, and I mentioned this last week as well when I started playing it, or this past weekend, how it is kind of very much, it is the traditional RPG / JRPG, right? And it reminds me a lot of, growing up. This is kind of what I played. This is really what I played. I first started off by playing Dragon Quest VII on the PlayStation 1. And that was kind of really my first exposure to it. I think I played a little bit of Final Fantasy V as well, on PlayStation. It was part of some kind of bundle, basically. But that was really kind of my first sort of venture into RPGs and that kind of thing. And and of course it makes perfect sense, but this game really kind of reminds me of starting off and, actually struggling to, grind through bosses or grind through monsters and that kind of thing. Struggling in combat, maybe getting stuck in a certain place where you have to retreat, go back into town, heal up, get better equipment. Maybe you have to grind a little bit before you go back into the dungeon. Like it just that kind of loop, that gameplay loop, is really nice. It's really nice to kind of go back to, and it's really just sort of, it's brought me back. And I again, I'm reiterating some things that I've already said before, but I just felt that I wanted to mention again. It is sort of really kind of bringing me back to where I started when I first started, playing games and that kind of thing. Just menu-based battles and command, turn-based combat like that. That's like my bread and butter. You know what I mean? I think part of me has shifted, not necessarily shifted away, but I've just started to try a bunch of different games, right, from that point on. But that really was kind of my main focus, is what I was comfortable with growing up playing, right? I wasn't the biggest fan of action, despite loving Zelda. But like really outside of that it was primarily kind of that style of game. And so I think it's a really nice sort of return to it, you know what I mean? It is interesting seeing kind of the discussions around this game, because for the most part this game has been really well received, but I do think that it might be a bit of a departure for some people to try to get back into this game, because it does retain a lot of like the old school kind of soul of like an SNES era type, video game, JRPG, right? And there are a ton of quality of life updates, including, quick saves and lower difficulty and more availability in terms of gear and whatnot, earlier on. But I still think it holds a lot of that original, the original kind of vision and style of the game. And I think for maybe some newer players, this might kind of turn them off a little bit, right? Especially if you started by playing, I don't know, something different, like a different type of RPG, a newer RPG with all of like the bells and whistles and quality of life stuff that comes with kind of the modern era of gaming. I mean, listen, I've grown very accustomed to, having a lot of those things at my disposal, and I often take advantage of those things, right? If I want to like speed up battle, or if I want to like speed up walking animations, I mean, I took advantage of all of those things when I played through Final Fantasy VII. If I played it kind of in its original format, I don't know how much patience I would have had, right? I wouldn't have been able to grind the way that I would have and gotten my party to a sufficient level. Like it just would have been difficult. So, having those things where I can, increase the walking animation and increasing the battle speed and whatnot, allowed me to, actually enjoy the game without being frustrated by some of the more outdated aspects of its time. And I think that's really, really beneficial. I think in order for newer players to maybe become acquainted with older games and that kind of thing, right? Because it's like, ultimately, really, the point of the game, whatever game it is for you to have fun with it. And so if you're not really having fun with it, it's a bit of a deterrent, you know what I mean? If you don't have those quality of life additions, I think that might be a huge like turnoff for people kind of in this era of gaming, where also it's kind of like a bit of like a time sink as well. It's like, do you want to spend all this time, like for example, if maybe your party just gets wiped out in a dungeon or something, and you weren't able to save, like, do you want to spend however long it took to get back that experience and get back to that same place that you were before you died. It's like, for a lot of people, that's like something where it's not, it's frustrating. It's not worthwhile, and they don't want to, that just kind of turns people off from playing, right? And so, of course, there are many different types of players out there. Like, everyone has their preferences and whatnot. But I do think having some more modern updates really allows people to, enjoy the game, regardless of, the time that it came from. I do think that some of those elements, that are included to benefit the modern player. But I do think that, some of the, I guess the genre in general has come so far from that point, because like Dragon Quest 3 is really kind of one of the inception points of the JRPG boom, you know what I mean, especially in Japan. And we've come so far from that point that I think a lot of people, that if you come from like playing, I don't know, maybe something like Metaphor, ReFantazio, like if you go from that to this, it's like a pretty significant departure, right? Where you're like really going back in time, and I think that might be a bit of a whiplash for some people. So I think there might be a bit of a disconnect with maybe some players who just maybe are not anticipating this type of game, because it is really, it's simple in terms of the story, the game mechanics. There are some things that you are able to like customize and whatnot, but in terms of complexity, it's really nothing crazy, right? So, and you're not necessarily able to do like a ton of customization outside of, picking someone's names and I guess assigning a type of personality to them and whatnot, which affects their stat growth and whatnot. I mean, you could spend a lot of time doing that for sure, but in terms of comparing it to other games where there are far more levels of like customization, I think it's it's pretty different. So it's like, I don't know. I think this game really is sort of like a perfect kind of little peek into that era of gaming, and bringing along with it some additional and probably necessary updates to help the experience be a lot smoother. But maybe it can just might not be someone's cup of tea, especially if they are accustomed to, the modern, game. I mean, like for me, it's like like I mentioned, I probably wouldn't have been able to play through the original Final Fantasy VII without the, speed up and animation speed ups and whatnot. I think it would have been really difficult for me to get into that. That's kind of where I think something like a remake or a remaster, it becomes really beneficial, right? It's interesting in the case of like a Final Fantasy VII, where they essentially, they completely, it's a remake, where, they include additional story elements and, on top of the, the huge overhaul in terms of the graphics and whatnot, like there's like additional storylines and whatnot. I haven't played through, the Rebirth, remake series, but, it does seem to be like a fairly significant departure in terms of, or, fairly significant change, from the original story. Of course, they follow along. Anyways, just to finish my thought on just the whole remake kind of phenomenon. Really, I've enjoyed the Dragon Quest 3 HD 2D a lot. It's been a lot of fun. I've had a lot of fun with it. I just think it is interesting to see kind of the different approaches in how things are getting remade, right? Again, looking at Final Fantasy VII and the way in which they've sort of gone about that. I think it's sort of, it's, again, a way to reintroduce the game to older players, but also introduce it to newer players as well. And I think with HD 2D remake for Dragon Quest, it's sort of a way to honor the tradition and the history of the original, while also being kind of like a new
providing kind of a new rendition of it, which I think is really nice. So, a lot of people can continue to kind of complain about just how heavily, how it heavily influenced the industry as the gaming industry is, with remakes and that kind of thing, and tending to kind of look back before moving forward. But there's a lot to appreciate about the past, and I think it's good to bring those kinds of games back into the fold for newer generations like myself who hadn't experienced those games. So there's benefits to it. And so, yeah. Anyways, that's going to do it for now. Provide another recording later this weekend and talk about some more stuff that catches my eye. All right, recording this on Saturday, November 23rd. It is a Saturday afternoon when I am recording this. It's been a week. It's been an interesting week. I think what's sort of put me off in a weird way this week. I guess one of the things that sort of put me off is kind of the changes with the weather. I mean, this always happens every year. So right now we're sort of kind of in a weird transition period where it's still technically fall, but it has gotten colder to the point where you could honestly say that it is sort of winter in a lot of ways. But winters over here usually consist of kind of rainy, sort of wet weather, which is what it is right now. And so kind of over the past week, it's gone from being really cold, to this kind of rainy, to just full on rain, which I have expressed that I am not a fan of earlier this week. So, this is sort of like a little foreshadowing, if you want to call it that, for this the earlier part of this episode, right? So it's sort of put me off because rain, I don't do well with rain, like I've said. I like to be at least somewhat out and about in some ways, at least, during some parts of the day. And when it is raining like that, I'm just not a fan of it. Luckily today it's been a little bit better, so I wanted to take advantage of that. So here I am, and I also wanted to kind of catch up on talking about some stuff, because there's been a few things that sort of caught my attention, and there's also some things that I've sort of wanted to talk about, some interesting things. But it's been a kind of a weird week. We're going towards sort of the end of November, leading into December, which is crazy to think about, that we're almost at the end of the year. I think it's going to become, at a certain point, it's going to be where I'm just not even going to acknowledge what time of the year it is, right? And I think it'll be kind of funny that way. If I do, at a certain point when I don't know how much older, but I do think about how it's just like, it's whatever. It's December or January. Who cares? It's just a day and name given to a specific time, just so we can kind of keep track of the record and stuff like that. But really, how much does it really matter too much necessarily, right? But I don't know. Anyways, so Kendrick dropped a new album yesterday, just out of the blue. That's been kind of really, blowing up everywhere. A lot of people are talking about it and everything. I listened to it. I listened to the album while I was working yesterday, and I liked it. I think there's definitely a few tracks that I have already kind of since gone back to, which I think is already sort of in a better, and I know I try not to do this, but it's hard not to, where, you compare albums or projects to an artist's previous works, but it's hard not to, because that's like sort of like the direct reference point. But I can definitely see this album in particular, GNX, being much more in my rotation, at least songs in it being in my rotation much more than Mr. Morale's was. I just think that it's hard with like something so conceptual like Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers, that where there is like a really clear focus of what his sort of vision is in terms of the album and the particular sound that he's going for. It just happens to be that particular sound, it was just not something that I was really all that it just really didn't really appeal to me necessarily, right? I just didn't really find there, and this really doesn't have to be the case, right? Because different songs and different projects, like you can engage them in many different ways. It doesn't have to be, it doesn't, I make the case for sort of my preference, where I do tend to value the replayability of an album and that kind of thing, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that I just couldn't find anything in it really necessarily that was worth me going back to something. Even if I can maybe, get more from a second or third listen by listening to like the lyrics and everything. But if I'm not enjoying the music overall, then it's not gonna stick with me, really. That's just how it is. That's just kind of how I tend to listen to music. If there is an album or something that I really like, I will be listening to it quite a bit over and just songs over and over, just like albums on repeated listens and that kind of thing. But that's just kind of how I am. And I think with this one, it's a lot shorter than I guess his previous album, and then two, there's a bit more of, it's definitely more, you could argue, I don't think it's to the same extent as something like Damn, where there are like clear singles that are sort of meant to be more, commercially friendly or whatever. But I can definitely see some of these other songs being a bit more radio friendly, if you want to call it that. I mean, there's a song on here that sounds sort of kind of similar with, like, it did have like DJ Mustard, similar to Not Like Us. I forgot the name of the song, but it's like sonically it sounds really similar to Not Like Us, so I could see that song kind of being popular as well. But I do like that it kind of sounds more kind of like West Coast flavor, if you want to call it that. The song Reincarnation sounds like really similar to a Tupac song, which I liked. It's probably my favorite song on the album. Yeah, I mean, overall, I enjoyed it. I think the first half is maybe a little weaker than the second half. I think second half flows through a lot better. I think there were some, my criticisms are not like super, I don't know how in depth my criticisms can be unless I give this further listens. I think some of the features are kind of weak. There's like a couple of them I'm kind of like, they don't really add too much. I feel that maybe they were just features that he had that were sort of representative of maybe that are part of his circle or whatnot. Not really. I think outside of like SZA and Roddy Ricch, I couldn't really recognize any of the other features, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that, but they just didn't really add too much. But really, I think it's just a solid album. It's not anything crazy conceptually. There are some songs like Reincarnation, just talking about just sort of his afflictions with, how he's dealt with fame, which is sort of is like a continuing theme in a lot of his songs and, albums recently. I think is a really, interesting way of, it just, he always has just like a really interesting way of handling that kind of perspective. Yeah, I just, I really, it's a nice album. It's a good album. And I could see myself like coming back to it on, repeated listens, at least specific songs as well. The ones that kind of really stood out to me. Yeah, it's interesting. I think I might have said this before, or I might have said this to someone recently, how my sort of, the way I listen to music has sort of drastically changed since college, high school, or whatever, because I remember during that period of time, I was just constantly, especially just like going, kind of the later years of high school leading into college, I was just constantly listening to hip hop. Like I was just, there was always a new album in rotation, whether it was I was listening to older albums or I was getting into, whatever the new stuff that was coming out. I was always listening to something new. And I think I've sort of, shifted away from just purely hip hop as sort of like my main genre. Like I've definitely listened to a variety of stuff over the years, but, hip hop at least has sort of been the primary genre of music that I've stuck to for a long time. And of course I continue to do that. It's just, I think my tastes have definitely shifted, where I think I am open and I'm more kind of wanting to listen to different things, and I don't want to just listen to hip hop. I think and I think in a similar sense, which this is something that I have talked about recently on the podcast, where I've said that there's been a shift on kind of like the pop charts as well, where rap is really not the most popular genre right now. Like right now, I mean, I don't even really know. I know like country is kind of big right now. There's a lot of country that's sort of been become a lot more popular. There's just been there's been a shift. And of course, like certain artists, like right now, Kendrick is probably the most, he's got a lot of people listening to his stuff right now. But, outside of him, I think, I think people may just have different wants. I think, I love rap music. I love hip hop, but I do think, especially when it comes to like popular rap music, there is, I think there has been sort of some level of stagnation, and then also I think audiences recognize that and want to see some more variety, especially like within the trap scene, right? I mean, I think there's only so much of it you can listen to without like being like, okay, it's you could see yourself getting into, maybe it's like good workout music or whatever. It's I don't know, maybe you enjoy listening to it while driving around or whatever, but I feel like there's only so much of it you can listen to before being like, okay, I feel like I've heard this particular song and these rhyme schemes like maybe too many times, and I should maybe like change a little bit. And yeah, I mean that, and what also comes is maybe like shifting demographics. People in different age, like it is really interesting. I don't know, like I think college kid, I don't even know what college kids listen to. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know how different it is, but I feel like even from like 5, 6 years ago, I mean, that is like a pretty substantial amount of time, but what like kids, college students my age, what they're listening to now is very different from what I was listening to in terms of just like the I don't know, it's just sort of I think there is like a shift in terms of what people are valuing. I don't know. I haven't really gauged it because I haven't like talked to like college students or anything like that. But part of me is kind of curious to hear like what they're. It might not even be that different. You know what I mean? But I mean, it's just interesting to think about, right? It's like what's trending, what what kind of what kind of music do people want to spend their time with? And how does it sort of affect the overall landscape of music and everything like that? So I don't know, a lot of factors to kind of consider, and it's sort of interesting. Just thinking about that because like and then just going kind of bringing it back to myself and what I've sort of listened to. I mean, I kind of go back and forth, right? This year, I think it was better in terms of the variety of hip hop that was available. And I mean, some of my favorite albums this year have been rap albums. Like I listened to, I mean, some of my favorite ones that have come out is the Mach-Hommy album and then the Denzel Curry album. Those are the ones that kind of stick out to me. But even that, I mean, it is a better year versus last year where there was really like nothing came out last year that I can even remember other than the Mick Jenkins album. And even then, there's been a lot of artists that have dropped stuff. Tyler, the Creator, you could probably say like some of the Griselda guys have dropped some stuff. Like that's almost like a guarantee. I think Schoolboy Q came out of the album earlier this year, which was like I didn't listen to the whole thing, but I remember it being solid. Like who else? Corday. I'm not I'm not like a huge fan of his, but he's like a decent sized rapper. So there's been stuff that has come out. It's just I just don't have this. I don't have the same desire to go listen to it as I did like 5-6 years ago. It's just different. And I think it's sort of, I don't know, it's like I tend to kind of just want to like there's other stuff out there that I think maybe fit better into, not fit better, but it's just more appealing to me maybe. And plus I just am not at the same level of wanting to constantly listen to music all the time. It's just different. My tastes have sort of shifted. I'm not constantly trying to find like a new album to listen to. Obviously I go through periods where I'm like, yeah, maybe I'm down to try out a bunch of new stuff, but it's just not to the same extent anymore. And I don't know, it's just interesting. It's sort of where I feel that I have sort of found myself. I think the way I engage with music recently has been not really listening to full albums necessarily, but just sort of finding different songs here and there that I enjoy, and then based off of that, maybe finding other songs that kind of fit into that. So I don't really listen to particular artists as I used to. Just kind of a variety of different things, as opposed to sticking with just one artist and, listening to their whole discography or whatever, which I have done before. It's just, I don't know, it's just a change. It's just a shift. Nothing wrong with that. I just find it to be interesting. And, I'm curious how other people, because I know about some of my other friends have also, their tastes have shifted as well. Like I know they don't listen, like myself, they just don't listen to, we've been big hip hop fans, for the longest time, but we just, I don't know. I think we've heard a lot of similar stuff with particular artists in particular genres, like I mentioned, like trap music. It's just kind of it's just a little limited, I think, you know what I mean? At least the way it currently is. And so you just gotta branch out a little bit, you know what I mean? I do think it's interesting how it's just people just have different, just it's all different. Some people just stick with there's some people that just listen to classic rock radio. They just listen to the same five songs. They listen to Crazy Train. They listen to Freebird. Like, they're just cool with that, you know what I mean? Like, they just people from that era tend to just stick with what they know and what they like. So I don't know, maybe at a certain point in time I will reach a point when I am just kind of like, you know what? I'm like satisfied with what I've heard. I'm satisfied just sticking to what I already enjoy and listening to that because I'm comfortable with it and I don't want to experiment. You know what I mean? I'm not at that point at all. I always want to look for new stuff, but it's possible. It's entirely possible that I reach that point. It's also different because it's a different. I also want to give a little bit of credence to, people from older generations and how they listen to music. It's like the availability of music was completely different. So it's like, of course, what they had in terms of if they only had a certain number of vinyls, or they were just exposed to whatever was popular on the radio. That was what they had. So it's like, I think the level of being able to experiment with the type of music you were able to listen to was far different from that era versus now, right? Like, if you don't have access to physical, if you didn't have access to physical media, CDs, like I said, vinyls, maybe even, or cassettes, whatever. If you didn't have that, then you just didn't have, you weren't able to listen to as many songs. Like, and I mean, nowadays you can listen to anything and everything, and that might be a little overwhelming. I mean, it can be in a lot of instances to me. So I don't want to dismiss. This is not me dismissing people's tastes or whatever. It's just kind of like a fact of like the era in which you grew up can shape, your way in the way in which you engage with media and music, and stuff like that. So I don't know. I think I just think especially this era that I grew up in, I was already exposed to kind of the variety of music from kind of an early age. I'm thinking, if kind of going back to sort of the high school, period, I listened to Pandora radio, which is kind of the earlier instances of just commercialized app music right before Spotify really began to take off. And even then, just the way the algorithm worked on Pandora Music was that it kind of shuffled the, whatever music or artists radio that you listen to in a kind of a similar way to how Spotify or like Apple Music is set up now. So I kind of, that was sort of like the way I already had sort of an early exposure to that, and I think I just sort of carried that forward with how I listen to music now, right? I have bought CDs in the past, and I've bought and listened to those CDs with an old CD player and that kind of thing, and once in a while I'll maybe engage with that, but really it's primarily just listening through the apps and the online sort of the online libraries that are available, right? So that's just kind of the way that I've sort of been, I guess, conditioned to listen to stuff. So it's just different, right? It will be interesting. I'm assuming if this sort of model of listening to music kind of keeps up, it's probably going to be kind of similar across the board, where there's just so much different types of music out there that it is impossible. It is literally impossible to listen to every song out there, but you can have the ability to listen to anything, right? I'm curious to see if that model is going to change. It doesn't really seem that way right now, but because we've sort of opened up in a way. It's kind of funny, the name Pandora, right? Like opening up Pandora's box, right? It's sort of like you sort of unleash this upon the world. It's like what other form of listening to music can it take, right? Of course, vinyl and all those other things are still available, but once you have this this convenience of being able to listen to anything, it's like, how do you shift back to, I don't know, maybe you're limited, maybe all of our servers crash, it goes away, like how do we adapt? I mean, at that point we have way more concerns at hand and way more things to be worried about outside of music, right? But I mean, if there is like a scenario in which just things go absolutely south and somehow the grid just falls apart in just across the world, what do we do? Like, where do we go back? Just electricity is just no longer existent. We have to, like, somehow build it back up, right? Like, where do we start? We start with just the most, the thing that's available, whatever physical tools that you have available to create music, and then try to, in some way, shape, or form, record that, right? You have to, like, build back up. So I don't know. So it's just I have no idea. I have no idea what the far future of the world is going to look like in terms of just the way in which we consume media and that kind of thing. But it's I don't know, it's an interesting thought experiment, just way back past our time, right? Whether things are going to exist the way they are, or if we could move into a different phase of humanity. I don't know. Just some thoughts. Just some crazy existential thoughts. Speaking of, I wanted to actually, speaking of sort of future planning, if you want to call it that, I've been watching some interesting videos recently. Maybe I've mentioned this a little while back. There are these videos that are sort of like, it's like city planning versus is like architecture, sort of along those veins. And the particular channels that kind of come to mind are, there's one, City Nerd is the kind of the main one that I've been watching, and then there's another one is what's it called? Not Like Bikes? I always forget the name, but something Not Bikes. And I tend to like City Nerd a little bit more. I feel like he provides a bit more of a positive twist versus Not Like Bikes. I don't want to look it up, but it's like something Not Bikes related. But anyways, I've been watching their videos. There's been a lot of interesting, he for some of them, he goes to a particular metropolitan area or a specific city, and he kind of does like a tour of it, just talking about the city infrastructure, the way the streets are aligned, the way in which public transportation is aligned with the city, and how good the availability of those things are. It's got me, one of the things that the City Nerd, he sort of continues to bring up is college. I was just talking earlier about being in college and whatnot, but it does have me thinking about, and his sort of main argument or main perspective that I found to be very interesting, is the way in which colleges, in a strange kind of way, represent this sort of like utopia of what a non-car dependent place, or car dependent city or whatever looks like. I mean, he there's videos have sort of pointed out specific cities that have kind of achieved some level of balance between public transportation, just non-car dependence, places like Japan or places like Tokyo, Amsterdam, New York, that kind of thing. Those are kind of like the big ones that come to mind. But City Nerd sort of posed how colleges kind of have that sort of vision down, essentially because all in that one space is everything is available in that space, right? If you are a college student, in sort of, an ideal situation, of course, this isn't always the case, but generally speaking, you are able to live, eat, work, study, all kind of within the same area that you exist, right? If you have an apartment on campus, you are able to walk there. Maybe you need to take some, in university, in college transportation to get to where you need to be, but it's all kind of available for you. It's all just sort of, and the time that you do spend outside of doing kind of the primary activities, you're able to spend that time doing that with the people that you sort of like reside with, right? Or reside nearby. But all of that is just, it's all kind of in this sort of bubble, that it's like, you'll never see that, at least in the US. I'm talking from really an American perspective. Obviously, you can look at, other places in the world who have, who have like a solid public transportation system, whatever, and just good amenities and whatnot. But in the U.S. in particular, like, most people are not going to see this type of, cohesion, if you want to call it that, this type of infrastructure ever again in their life if they, once they graduate from college, which I found it to be really, I don't know, it's sort of, and, in my head, it's like, why can't we have that? It's like, why, for some, it works in some instances, right? Like, you're able to kind of build some level of community, like that. There is no other situation as concentrated as a university campus where you're able to kind of like build some level of community with the people around you, the people you live with, the people you go to class with. Maybe you join like a club or something like that. You're able to, kind of have some sort of camaraderie there as well. And it's all within this bubble. It's all within kind of this one space. And that just doesn't exist in most other places, in the U.S. in particular. And it's like we we create these sort of structures so that the people that exist in those structures are able to kind of succeed, and then you just leave, and then you're like not able to find that again unless you move somewhere in particular, or you go back to college as maybe like a grad student or something and are able to kind of, I don't know, live in sort of a communal fashion, similar to how maybe you had done when you were an undergraduate. But it's just, I just think it's so, it's such a contrast of going, for myself, I never lived on campus, so I didn't get that full university experience, but I did get a sense of it, just, going in between classes and staying on campus for the majority of the day. And so it's just so interesting where it's like, why can't we, it works to an extent, right? Like people seem, if you're able to have some level of connection with those people that you sort of live with. Obviously, it's not always going to be an ideal situation. I understand that there are, many asterisks that you can kind of put on that. But for the most part, I feel like you can make an argument that it's like a pretty good system, right? Especially if you don't need to, and I think sort of the argument, one of the main sort of proponents of the argument is that you don't need to drive. Like if you are sort of in a space that you can make it work. But it's like most people are not going to have that. They're not going to have that available to them once they, go back into the world, adult world, right? Because you go into this bubble, you exist there for like 4 years or whatever, and then you go back out and you're like, what happened, man? This shit is not, this isn't the real world. Like, what was that before? Like, why is it such a contrast from that? It's like, why can't we make that work in other situations as well? Where it is like just like some kind of community thing, like residential living situations where it's also nearby a grocery store, and it's also close to the areas where you can meet up with people, and just have just events and whatnot. It's all in a single space, right? So is it so hard to try to replicate that in the real world? And obviously, yeah, it is probably really difficult because those structures are already in place within most, a lot of other places where it's really difficult to try to build that, and expensive and all that. And I understand, but I just think it is sort of like, if it was able to be, if you're able to do it here, why can't you do it somewhere else? Because it seems, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if you are in that kind of situation and you, I don't know, wouldn't you tend to be a little bit more, if you are sort of connected with people already, it's sort of, I don't know. I just find it to be, it's such a weird, it's such a weird phase, and also just like a place, because it's so different from the rest of, again, within like an American perspective, it's so different from literally everywhere else. like anywhere else in the country, outside of maybe some other cities that are maybe kind of set up in a similar fashion, but those are very far and few in between. So it's just, I don't know. I just, that just kind of had me really thinking about it, like after watching those videos. It's like, yeah, like why, I mean, it seems like other, countries have sort of like a decent idea of being able to like have locations close enough to your home or where you live, so it's not such a hassle trying to get from place to place. But it just, I don't know. I've been enjoying kind of watching those videos, listening to their thoughts, about it, because it really has me thinking about my own living space, my own living space, and the way in which I sort of, whether I am commuting or whether I'm just sort of driving from place to place. It's like, and how my situation was sort of different when I was in college, if I was, on campus or whatever. Just had me thinking, and I'm curious if people, I mean, it seems like a lot of people do think about that kind of thing, just watching, the response from their videos. But I do, it's not something I had really thought about critically until kind of recently, right? Because you just sort of accept as is. You're just like, yeah, this is what life is kind of what it's like, I have to, in the US, we're sort of inundated. We sort of bought into the fact that most places you have to drive to. And it's like, unless you're in somewhere like a New York or something, you have to have a car and you have to do these things. And it's like, why does it have to be that way? Why can't there be the infrastructure set up so that people don't have to spend so much money on gas and their cars and whatnot, and find a space where they can build some level of community with the people around them. It's not like you have to necessarily. People, people can live within their own homes. Like, if you want to really be a suburbanite, sure, that's fine. But I think majority of people just want to have the amenities, the things available to them with ease. And for people that get older, especially, this is like a big thing. This is like a big issue. For elderly people, it's like, if they, to a certain extent, they might not be able to drive a car, but if they're able to walk a short distance to get what they need, that's like a huge thing to consider, to have those things available to them, instead of having to drive, like, depend on their motor skills, which is probably not going to be to the same level it was when they were younger. These are things that you have to kind of consider as well, not just for younger people, but also just everyone in general. There is like some level of benefit to have things available to you in closer proximity, right? So it just has me thinking about that kind of thing, and that is sort of, I think I find it to be pretty valuable in a lot of instances. I've been very fortunate to where the things that I do need, one, I'm able-bodied, so I'm able to drive, and two, I do have things that are pretty close to me. So it's not like it's such a huge hassle where I have to deal with traffic or just, just a certain level of like, congestion and just, barriers and roadblocks or anything like that. I have things that are pretty close that I have available to me, but that's really not the case for a lot of people. So, it's just sort of, I don't know. I think I've really liked how these videos have sort of had me thinking about these things much more critically than I had before, and then thinking about what would my sort of preferences be if I were to find somewhere different to live. So I don't know. It's just interesting. It's there a lot of really, I don't know. It's just really got me thinking about a lot of things. So, good stuff. Highly recommend City Nerd. If you have the chance, he has a lot of really good videos on where he talks about, what I really like about his stuff too is that I think he's gone, one of the videos that I really liked from him recently, he went to Detroit, and I think Detroit has been really, it's been known to sort of be like, oh, you live in Detroit, I'm really sorry for you, and that kind of thing. And I think he's sort of, with this video, I don't know if he's fully dispelled some of those notions, but he has really kind of pointed out that the city is making very concentrated efforts to making things a lot better for the people that do live there. And it's not, it's not to the same extent that it was many years ago where it was, crime ridden and whatnot. I mean, most major cities deal with certain levels of crime, of course, but you're just completely disregarding the rest of the good things that they have. And I really liked kind of the approach that he took and the things that he showed. And it's like, yeah, and you know what? Honestly, maybe I'll check out Detroit. Who knows? Maybe there's some interesting stuff out there. But yeah, those are kind of the things that I've been, I don't know, sort of thinking about. Yeah, we still got basketball going on, of course. There's some games today. The NBA Cup games were yesterday. The Warriors played the Pelicans. Good game. It was closer than I wanted. It kind of was like really, it could have been bad towards the end because they just were not making their free throws. But they managed to close it out. It could have been bad, but they were able to close it out. So the Warriors look like they're going to be moving forward in the cup. So we'll see what that looks like, what the following stages of that are going to look like for them. But yeah, more games today and tomorrow. Games are every day, which is like nice, I guess. But yeah, not much else to really note there. We're sort of in a, we're a month or so into the season, and I think you can sort of, it's really hard to tell. Like, there's so many teams that are kind of have really similar records, especially in the Eastern Conference. Well, I guess both conferences really, but where they're all kind of like hovering at 500. It would be, I'm intrigued to see like which ones are going to be the ones that kind of like stick out, maybe go on a run. Who knows? Some teams are still trying to like gel together and figure things out. But it's early. It's very, very early in the season, and we got a long way to go. So a lot of things can happen. The Sixers, I think, have been sort of like the poster child of getting shit on because of the whole Embiid, and they finally won yesterday, which is probably super. It's a nice sign of relief for Philly fans, but yeah, they've been kind of bad, and the Paul George trade has not, or the Paul George rather sign, it's not looked the best, right? I mean, he's been injured. He got injured again. And people are sort of expecting them to be in playoff contention and whatnot, myself included. But right now, they're the worst team in the league. So, yeah, I don't know. I mean, they could probably get into a playoff spot because of how bad the East is. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes. A lot of season to go. You can definitely see. You can definitely see some teams being a bit more on top of things, but I it's too early to say if there's a real definitive team that's gonna stick out right now. But yeah, I'm gonna leave it off at that. For this, that's gonna do it for this week's episode. Thanks for listening. As always, this has been Save the Semantics. Signing off.